What if the strangest thing about the Euphrates River drying up isn't the drought, not the cracked mud, not the empty banks, not even the ancient ruins suddenly appearing beneath the water? What if the thing we should be paying attention to is the sound? Because for years now, videos have circulated claiming people are hearing screams, groans, metallic echoes, impossible noises coming from beneath the Euphrates. And every time those videos show up, the internet splits into two camps. One side says, "Relax, it's wind, it's caves, it's geology." The other side says, "No, Revelation said this would happen." But tonight, I don't want to start at Revelation. Because if we want to understand why people are terrified of what might be under that river, we have to go much further back. Back before the final trumpet. Back before Babylon. Back before the empires. Back to the beings the ancient world said were never supposed to touch the earth in the first place. So stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to look at the Euphrates very differently. And before this video ends, I want you to tell me, is this just the earth making noise? Or is something old starting to move? Welcome back to Beyond the Verse, where we don't just read prophecy at the surface. We follow the symbols, the history, the geography, and the parts people usually skip because they're too uncomfortable. And today, we need to talk about what's actually screaming under the Euphrates. Before we get to the river, before we get to the four angels, before we get to the terrifying line in Revelation that says they are bound at the great Euphrates, we need to ask a much older question. Who would be dangerous enough that heaven would not just punish them, but chain them? Because that detail matters. A regular enemy can roam, a deceiver can whisper, a spirit can influence. But something that has to be locked away beneath the earth, that is a different category. So let's build the foundation. To understand why they are down there, we have to go back way before the Book of Revelation was ever written. We aren't just talking about regular fallen angels here. The ancient texts call this specific group the Watchers. They were a high-ranking faction of cosmic beings tasked with observing early humanity, but they went completely rogue. And that phrase, the Watchers, sounds almost harmless at first. Like guardians, like silent observers, like beings posted on the edge of human history to make sure the early world unfolded the way it was supposed to. But according to the ancient story, they did not stay in their lane. They watched humanity long enough to become fascinated by humanity. And then, fascination became desire. Desire became rebellion. And rebellion became one of the strangest events in ancient religious literature. Because the Watchers did not just disobey. They crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. Instead of just watching, they broke the ultimate rule. They interfered. Led by a being named Semyaza, they descended to Earth, took human wives, and altered human history forever. They didn't just cause chaos. They traded forbidden secrets. They taught humanity how to forge weapons of war, how to read astrology, and how to use dark medicine. They essentially accelerated human corruption, creating a hybrid civilization that completely broke the natural order of the world. Now pause right there, because that is the part people rush past. The crime was not simply that they rebelled. The crime was that they taught. They leaked knowledge into the human world before humanity had the wisdom to carry it. Weapons, sorcery, divination, manipulation, violence dressed up as advancement. That is why this story feels so different from a basic good versus evil myth. It is not just about monsters. It is about corrupted civilization. It is about intelligence without morality, progress without restraint, power without holiness. And if that sounds familiar, maybe that's why these ancient stories still make people uncomfortable. Because they are not just ancient, they feel current. The texts say they initially landed on a place called Mount Hermon, but after they lost their rebellion, the judgment was highly specific. They weren't just cast into a generic void. They were dragged into the deep places of the earth and bound beneath the cradle of civilization, the Euphrates River basin. This region became the literal cage holding the architects of the ancient world's collapse. That is where the geography starts to get eerie, because the Euphrates is not just any river. It is one of the great rivers of the ancient world. It runs through the memory of Eden, empire, conquest, exile, and apocalypse. This river witnessed the rise of kingdoms that shaped the Bible's entire prophetic imagination. Babylon, Assyria, Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization. But if the old texts are taken seriously, it was also something else. A boundary, a burial place, a lock. So, why are they specifically chained up while other dark forces seem to roam free? Because their crime was considered a permanent breach of cosmic law. The ancient Book of Enoch explains that the Creator sentenced them to total darkness beneath the dirt for exactly 70 generations. They were put on a literal countdown timer, buried alive under the mud and the water, completely locked away until the final chapters of human history. And that is the piece that changes everything. Because a prison with no release date is one thing, but a prison with a timer? That means history is not random. That means the lock was never meant to stay closed forever. That means the question is not just, are they down there? The question is, what happens when the countdown ends? There's a pattern in these ancient texts. The forces of light are never kept in chains. They roam free. So the moment the text mentions 4 fallen angels bound tightly beneath the Euphrates, that should raise a massive red flag. Who are they? Why lock them up under a river? And more importantly, what happens when their prison doors finally unlock? That is the question nobody can get away from. Because Revelation does not casually mention the Euphrates. It says, 4 angels are bound there, not passing through, not guarding it, not watching over it, bound. And when something is bound, it means something stronger had to restrain it. So when people hear strange noises under the Euphrates and immediately connect it to prophecy, I understand why. Even if you're skeptical, you have to admit the symbolism is intense. A drying river, ancient ruins resurfacing, a prophetic text about prisoners beneath the Euphrates, and a generation watching it happen on a phone screen in real time. That combination is exactly why this story spreads like wildfire. And be honest with me, if you've seen one of those Euphrates screaming videos, did you scroll past it? Or did you stop and watch the whole thing? Comment, I heard it, if you've seen those clips. Because I want to know how many of you got pulled into this rabbit hole too. An ancient hidden book actually gives us a clue. It explains that a long time ago, a group of powerful beings started a rebellion against heaven, lost, and were buried deep beneath the earth. If they've been trapped under the dirt for thousands of years, could those strange, echoing sounds be the noise of them finally waking up? Now, this is where we have to hold 2 thoughts at once. Because yes, science has explanations for strange underground sounds. Wind can move through caves, pressure can shift rock. Drying earth can crack, collapse, and echo in ways that sound disturbingly alive. But ancient prophecy is rarely interested in only one layer of meaning. In biblical symbolism, physical events often mirror spiritual realities. A famine can be both a food shortage and a judgment. A river can be both water and a boundary. A sound can be both geology and a warning. So the question is not just, can science explain the noise? The deeper question is, why is this specific place, with this specific prophetic history, becoming a global symbol right now? But why this specific river? Historically, the Euphrates acted as a literal border between 2 completely different worlds. On one side, you had the perfection of Eden. On the other, the dark empires of the ancient world. The river wasn't just water. It was a spiritual guardrail keeping them apart. That line matters. A spiritual guardrail. Because in the ancient mind, geography was not neutral. Mountains were meeting places between heaven and earth. Deserts were testing grounds. Seas represented chaos, and rivers were thresholds. The Euphrates separated worlds. It marked the edge of promise. It framed the lands where empire after empire rose against God's order. So when Revelation places bound angels at the Euphrates, it is not just giving us a map coordinate. It is pointing to a spiritual border. And when that border dries up, the image becomes hard to ignore. Because a drying boundary is a weakening boundary. A riverbed becoming a road is not just an environmental story. In prophecy, that is an access point, and rulers back then knew how to weaponize it. An ancient tyrant named Nimrod altered the river's flow just to build the Tower of Babel. Centuries later, Cyrus the Great's forces conquered Babylon by redirecting the Euphrates, lowering the water so soldiers could enter through the riverbed. That detail is chilling because it shows a pattern. The Euphrates has been manipulated before. It has been used as a shield, a weapon, a border, and a doorway. Ancient Babylon trusted its walls. It trusted its river. It trusted the systems that made it feel untouchable. But history says the river was redirected, the bed was crossed, and the empire fell from the inside. And now, when people hear that the Euphrates is drying again, they don't just hear climate news. They hear an echo. They hear, the road is opening. They hear, the barrier is thinning. They hear, something that was held back may not be held back forever. If you're still here, this is the point where I need you to hit like. Because this is exactly the kind of topic that gets buried when people reduce it to either just science or just conspiracy. On this channel, we're going to look at both the physical world and the prophetic pattern. And trust me, the next part is where it gets even stranger. Fast forward to today, and NASA satellites discovered something massive. Billions of tons of water have vanished from the area. The river is drying up so fast that the loss of weight is actually relieving pressure on the Earth's crust, causing the ground to shift and fracture. Now, to be precise, NASA's GRACE satellite data has shown huge freshwater losses across the Tigris-Euphrates region over a measured period, including groundwater depletion. That alone is serious. But symbolically, it is even heavier, because water has weight, literal weight. When massive amounts of water disappear, the land does not simply sit there unaffected. The ground responds. Pressure changes, cracks form, ancient layers get exposed, and suddenly, what was buried starts coming back into view. That is the part that feels almost too on the nose, because the old story says something was buried beneath the earth. Then the river begins to dry. Then the mud begins to split. Then the forgotten world starts surfacing. Even if you do not believe anything supernatural is happening, you can understand why people are paying attention. The land itself looks like it is opening a file that was sealed for thousands of years. Now, mainstream science claims the wind blowing through these new underground caves is just acting like a speaker, amplifying the desert breeze into creepy noises. But if it's just empty space, why is the drying mud suddenly exposing 3,000-year-old palaces and ancient warnings carved into stone? That is the tension. Science says the sound may be resonance, wind through cavities, air moving through fractured stone, the earth behaving like an instrument, like a guitar body amplifying a string. And honestly, that explanation makes sense on one level. But then the mud starts giving up secrets. Ancient settlements, lost ruins, old inscriptions, pieces of civilizations that were swallowed by time and water. And that creates a second question. Not, can wind make a scary sound? Yes, it can. The better question is, why does this place keep revealing exactly the kind of buried history that the ancient texts told us to watch? Because sometimes, the physical explanation tells you how something happens, but it does not tell you why the story around it feels so precise. Look, science can easily explain how wind echoes through broken rock. But geology can't explain why this environmental collapse is perfectly mirroring a thousands of years old roadmap right in our lifetime. So, what do you think is actually down there? And that is where I land with this. Not claiming every viral audio clip is real. Not claiming every shadow under a bridge is a demon. Not claiming we should throw away science because a video on the internet scared us at 2 in the morning. But I am saying this. The Euphrates is not just drying in a vacuum. It is drying inside a story. A story with Eden on one side, empire on the other, Babel in the middle, Babylon downstream, 4 bound angels in Revelation, and ancient watcher traditions that speak of rebellious beings chained beneath the earth until the appointed time. So maybe the screaming is wind. Maybe it is rock. Maybe it is the sound of a dying riverbed breathing through cracks. But maybe the reason it feels so disturbing is because deep down, we recognize the pattern. The river is not just losing water, it is losing its silence. So now, I want to hear from you. Do you think the Euphrates sounds are just natural echoes being turned into fear content? Or do you think the ancient texts were pointing to something real beneath that river? Comment your answer below. Wind, warning, or watchers. And if you want the next episode, I'll go deeper into Revelation 9 and the 4 angels prepared for the hour, the day, the month, and the year. Because that phrase is way more specific than most people realize. Subscribe to Beyond the Verse if you want the Bible, prophecy, ancient history, and the strange edges of the world explored without watering it down. Because sometimes, the scariest thing under the earth is not the sound. It's the fact that someone told us to expect it.